The left uses a shooting in Boulder, Colorado to push their race narrative and gun control. Governor Kemp signs an election reform bill. President Biden holds his first press conference. And we'll look at what the gospel has to say about racial issues. My name is Sean Clinton, and this is the God of Freedom Show. The show is sponsored by Anchor. It's the easiest way to make a podcast. So I always wanted to start a podcast, but didn't know where to begin. Anchor is for you. Anchor is very simple to use, and it's also free. All you do is simply record the audio from your phone, computer, laptop, wherever, edit it, and then post it. You can monetize it with sponsorships or donation buttons, and you can distribute it to sites like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check it out at anchor.fm or download the app. Again, it's anchor.fm or download the app. Alrighty, so we are back. I hope everyone is having themselves a great week. So we have a lot to get to today, so just jump right into it. So earlier this week, unfortunately, another mass shooting happened on Monday afternoon. This was in Boulder, Colorado. And basically what happened was there was a gunman who went into a grocery store it was called King's Super's grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. And this shooter went in there and shot 10 people were killed, including the police officer. See the officer's name. 1 second. The slain officer was a 51-year-old Eric Talley, who was the first member of law enforcement to arrive at the scene. Harold said that he was shot in the head, according to the arrest warrant after that, or whatever. So again, it's another horrible situation that happened, and the gunman has been, arrested and is probably being held in jail and is going to be hopefully prosecuted and all that. But of course, this didn't stop the left from pushing their whole race narrative and gun control narrative like they always do. So let's start with the race narrative, because that's probably one of the bigger parts of this. So basically, when the guy was, arrested, the shooter, a lot of people on the left automatically assumed that the guy was white, and that this is a product of white supremacy and whiteness or whatever, her whiteness, and simply because he was detained without issue. And all that. So here's a few tweets from a few leftists about it. So the first tweet is from a guy named CJ Rollman, and here's what he said. The suspected gunman in the Boulder, Colorado mass shooting is a white guy. 7 reported dead. Q, mental issues, bad day, parking dispute, or anything else other than that he's most likely is a white domestic terrorist. A white man walked into a grocery store this is a guy named Dylan Park, and here's what he said. A white man walked into a grocery store in Boulder, killed 10 people, and was apprehended by the police, and walked out of the building completely unharmed, which is not true. Right down the road, the police still killed Elijah McClain while he apologized for not doing anything wrong. 2 different Americas. The next tweet is from a guy named Tay Anderson, and here's what he tweeted out. Aurora, Colorado, 12 dead, white male shooter escorted out alive. Charleston, South Carolina, 9 dead, white male escorted out alive. Atlanta, Georgia, 8 dead, white male escorted out alive. And then Boulder, Colorado, 10 dead, and white male shooter escorted out alive. See a trend? And finally, the other tweet is from a guy named Qasim Rashid. And here's what he said. Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old black child. Police shot him in 1.7 seconds and let him suffer in agonizing pain for 4 minutes and die. Colorado terrorist is a grown white man who killed 2 people, including the cop. A cops arrested him alive and helped him to a stretcher for immediate medical care. So basically, you kind of see the narrative that the left's trying to push right here. So here's another set of tweets. Pull it up. This is from Mina Harris, who is the niece of Vice President Kamala Harris. And here's what she said. The Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the great terrorist threat in our country. I saw Boulder trending and I immediately knew my heart is with everyone affected by this horrific tragedy. This is absolutely devastating. From someone inside the store where the Boulder shooting happened, it seemed like all of us had imagined we'd be in a situation like this at some point in our lives. So, of course, the whole narrative that the left's trying to push is that all this is a product of white supremacy and whiteness overall. And, kind of the whole narrative about how the shooter was escorted out alive, arrested without issue or whatever. Okay, you know why? Because he didn't resist arrest. There's this whole narrative that because if the guy would have been colored, which I'll get to that in a second, that the police would have shot him right away without, even if he didn't resist arrest. And that's a whole part of the whole narrative from the left that the police are systematically racist and then they go out and hunt black people and shoot them while they peacefully apprehend white people or whatever. I mean, it's not true whatsoever. The facts and evidence does not hold in their favor. It simply doesn't, because in fact, the number of black, black people who were shot unarmed by the police is very, very, very low. Like, I think at 2019, or even 2020 is like 19 of them. And even in those situations, it could have been that the guy was still attacking the police. That's why they were shot. So, again, the evidence does not hold against for the left that the cops are systematic racists who are out in the streets hunting black people every day. It's simply not the case. So, of course, as time went on, as the information came out, it turns out the less narrative about how this was another product of white supremacy and all that, well, it didn't quite pan out as they hoped. Because the shooter was actually a Syrian immigrant who, had mental issues and was apparently a big advocate for, or had support for, like, ISIS, and it was, hated, Trump and all that. So yeah, their narrative that this guy was a white guy is completely torn apart, because he wasn't. And, of course, I'm not going to show the picture or name the suspects, the shooter's name, because, again, like I said last week, I have a policy on the show and on the blog overall where I don't name or show pictures of mass shooters, simply because study shows when you do that, it basically it has this way of showing people they can get attention by doing this, so it encourages copycats basically. So that's why I avoid using the shooter's name, mass shooter's name, on all these cases. But, again, their narrative about race was completely destroyed in a matter of seconds when the identity of the shooter came out. So that's why you kind of see the story kind of being buried a little bit, because it didn't fit their narrative, because the media has a narrative that is saying, and the narrative they're trying to push is that America is systematically racist, and anything that contradicts their narrative, they're just sweeping under the rug. Even with the shooting last week, again, it's been a little over a week. There has been no evidence to support the notion that the shooter in that case was doing it for racial reasons. There's no evidence of that. But the left is still trying to push that narrative. It's ridiculous. But of course, like clockwork, another narrative they're trying to push is the whole gun control narrative. And so, number one thing that some of the left on tried to do was basically blame the NRA, as usual, and some people calling the NRA a terrorist organization and all that, which is not. It happens every mass shooting where the NRA is somehow responsible for it, and that they are a terrorist organization, as if they're hiring these shooters to go out and kill people, which is no evidence. It has never been the case in any mass shootings. No mass shooters in all history in America has been linked to the NRA. The only link is that, really it's not even a link, is that the NRA supports gun rights and the left hates gun rights. And anybody who tries to stand up for it must be destroyed. Which is why they come down hard on the NRA. So there's this guy named, his Twitter name is called No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, which I guess his name is Brian Tyler Cohen. And here's what he said. Holy crap! He said another word, but I don't want to actually use it. But anyways, he said, Boulder, Colorado passed an assault weapons ban in 2018. The NRA sued the city, and a judge struck down the ban 10 days ago. The Boulder shooter bought the gun 6 days before the shooting. These deaths were the direct result of NRA's intervention. No, it wasn't, actually. It was not. And the gun that was used was not a quote-unquote assault weapon, which an assault weapon is not actually a thing. Usually when you hear the term assault weapon, it's usually referred to like automatic firearms, which are not legal in the United States. But the shooter in this case used a pistol, which was not banned in the assault weapons ban. So that narrative is completely torn apart right there. So yeah. But of course, they didn't not stop the left or the media or the Biden administration from pushing new gun control measures. So President Biden has recently said that he's going to be pushing a new, trying to push Congress to pass a gun control bill and all that. So here's what he had to say about it.
While we're still waiting for more information regarding the shooter, his motive, the weapons he used, the guns, the magazines, the weapons, the modifications that apparently have taken place to those weapons that are involved here, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again. I got that done when I was a senator. It passed. It was law for the longest time. And it brought down these mass killings. We should do it again. We can close the loopholes in our background check system, including the Charleston loophole. That's one of the best tools we have right now to prevent gun violence. The Senate should immediately pass, let me say it again, the United States Senate.
So one thing I want to comment on right there that's a complete lie is that the whole assault weapons ban in 1994 or whenever that was passed worked to stop mass shootings, which was not the case at all. It's actually not true whatsoever. And the whole idea of the Charleston loophole, you hear this like the gun show loophole and all that. And basically what the gun show loophole is that basically if I go there, buy a gun legally, and I give it to a relative, like my brother, father, or wherever, that's considered the loophole right there, which is, I mean, come on. That's not anything unusual. That's not anything strange or whatever. It's pretty common all throughout the United States. And if that was a big issue, we would already know it. But, they want to shut that down. And the way to shut down is going to be requiring a national gun registration. So I can't pass on my firearms to my son or daughter or wherever. So, yeah, that's a big infringement on the Second Amendment rights. And the idea that any of these gun measures would have stopped this is completely laughable. Again, assault weapons ban would not have stopped this shooting particularly, because it was not a quote-unquote assault weapon, according to the less definition at least, because it was a pistol that kind of looked like an AR-15, but it wasn't. But the thing is, when the left uses, they really kind of broaden out what an assault weapons ban is, or what assault weapon is. So some really kind of narrative on the left that they use for the term assault weapons is that it's basically anything that's semi-automatic. So when you look at it like that, and they want to ban anything that's semi-automatic from that standpoint, that would eliminate pretty much almost all guns, all handguns, except for like revolvers and pretty much just revolvers. Every rifle except for bolt action, pump action, or lever action. All shotguns except for pumped action. And so the vast majority of guns will be banned. And they say, oh, it's not a gun ban. Yes, it is a gun ban. So when Biden says we can pass an assault weapons ban, well, you could try, but it's not going to work. And so what really states need to do at this point is that, and I hope, Georgia, Florida probably will do this, is that they're going to say, no, we're not going to enforce this at all. You can pass all you want, but we're not going to enforce it. And try to make us enforce it. If you want to enforce it, come down and enforce it. But we're not going to enforce it. Because, again, we have in a second, and I know the left wants to ignore this, but we do have the Second Amendment right in the United States. And here's what the Second Amendment says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The key phrase, shall not be infringed. So it's insane. It's completely insane, but again, we saw this coming from a mile away. I'm really surprised it didn't happen last week with it, but it kind of did, but not as loud. But it's insane. It's completely insane that they're still trying to push this whole thing. But it's not going to work, and there's no way people here in Georgia, people in Florida, people in Texas, people in Louisiana, people in Alabama, or whatever, are not going to fall or not going to obey this. They're not going to go for it. Alrighty, so I'm going to continue on with, the Georgia the Georgia election reform bill. But first, you got to go over to YouTube where I got it free and bother to check it out. So not only you get the rest of, of the election reform bill, but also Joe Biden's press conference, and also kind of talking about what the gospel has to say about racial issues, and also the good stuff and best of the week. And remember, you can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. This is the Guy to Freedom Show. Alrighty, so now let's move on to the election reform bill that passed here in Georgia. Alrighty. So, over the past couple of days, Governor Kemp signed into law here in Georgia. It's the Georgia's Election Integrity Act, which is basically an election reform bill to help fix some of the issues surrounding, the 2020 election and everything. That's why, That's why this thing was being pushed in the first place, because all the chaos and issues surrounding that election. And as you know, as I said a few times already in this episode, or on the show, is that I don't believe, I'm not seeing evidence that proves that the election was stolen or anything. I do think there was some weird things that did happen, but none of that was enough to prove that the election was stolen. And until evidence comes out, I'm going to keep saying that. I know that's a very unpopular opinion on the right nowadays, but it's reality. It is the reality of the situation we are in right now. But it doesn't mean that there should be anything, that we can't face anything, because there was cases of fraud. Again, it wasn't enough to overturn the election, but there was a few cases of fraud, and it does need to be addressed. And this, the Georgia election bill, it really is the starting point to fix all that. It's not perfect, but it is pretty good. So let's see what the actual bill says. So, there's a article in the Daily Wire, that basically goes over the bill. So here is what the article says right here. As the Daily Wire reported, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed the Republican-backed Election Integrity Act of 2021, or SB 202, into law Thursday as Democratic lawmakers protested the bill. With Senate Bill 202, Georgia will take another step toward ensuring elections are secure, accessible, and fair, Governor Kemp said on Thursday. Ensuring the integrity of the ballot box isn't partisan. It's about protecting the very foundation of who we are as Georgians and as Americans. Predictably, Democrats condemned the bill as a supposed symptom of continued voter suppression and white supremacy, which is no shock. For example, Elizabeth Warren compared the bill to Jim Crow while promoting the debunked conspiracy theory that Stacey Abrams won the Georgia gubernatorial race in 2018. Here's what she tweeted out. The Republican who was sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair... Alright. So silly. The Republican who was sitting in Stacey Abrams' chair just signed a despicable voter suppression bill into law to take Georgia back to Jim Crow. The Senate must pass the For the People Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act immediately. Our democracy is at stake tonight. And the whole For the People Act, that garbage voting bill in the House right now, the Democrats are trying to push, it's unconstitutional, because elections are really supposed to be on the states to handle. The states are supposed to handle their own kind of electoral results and all that. This will nationalize it and create all sorts of problems. It will get rid of all voter ID requirements. It will just open so many possible scenarios of voter fraud, like actual voter fraud, that could potentially actually steal an election. So what Governor Kemp here did was prevent that. And this could be another case where, like, Georgia, Florida definitely is not gonna, we're not gonna push this. We're not gonna force this law. We have our own laws in the election. And if you want to try to enforce it, come and do it yourselves. And honestly, probably the Supreme Court will look at it and say, no, this is unconstitutional. We're to strike it down. But I just love how the left is still trying to push the narrative that for both elections, for 2016, that Trump was the illegitimate president because he stole the election then, and that Governor Kemp stole the election from Stacey Abrams, which is no evidence of either case. And they want to come down on Republicans, and rightfully so in my view, but it's still hypocritical on them for saying that election was stolen in 2020, which it wasn't. But still, it is very hypocritical that they still push this narrative while trashing Republicans, were some Republicans who believe it, for doing the same thing. While much of the criticism focuses either on the widely sustained and hyperbolic comparisons to Jim Crow policies or specific cynical mischaracterizations of the bill, such as Senator John Ossoff tweeting, "Among its outrageous provisions, it criminalizes giving water to voters who are waiting in line. It remains important to avoid distractions of partisan politics and understand what the bill actually says." So here's what we need to know. Again, this is on the Daily Wire. Voter ID requirements for absentee ballots. One of the central components of SB 202 is an ID requirement for absentee voting. Currently, all that was required was that the voters sign an application with signature matching processes used to verify the identity of the potential voter. Now, absentee voters will be required to provide some form of identification, whether it be a driver's license, a state ID number, or other form of identification. Any person applying for absentee ballot by mail shall make application and write on the form made available by the Secretary of State. In order to confirm the identity of the voter, such form shall require the elector to provide his or her name, date of birth, address as registered address where the elector wishes the ballot to be mailed, and the number of his or her Georgia driver's license or identification card. 35 LC 2280325S issued pursuant to Article 5 of Chapter 5 of Title 40, the bill declares. If such elector does not have a Georgia's driver's license or identification card issued pursuant to Article 5 of Chapter 5 of Title 40, the elector shall affirm this fact in the manner prescribed in the application, and the elector shall provide a copy of form of identification listed in subsection C of Code Section 21-2-17. The form made available to the Secretary of State shall include a space to affix a photocopy or electronic image of such identification. The Secretary of State shall develop a method to allow secure electronic transmission of such form. The deadline for requesting an absentee ballot in this manner will also be set 11 days before Election Day. And so the next thing it does is a reduction in early voting before runoffs, with runoffs held 4 weeks after the general election. The bill reduces early voting period before runoffs from 3 weeks to as little as 1 week. The bill also calls runoffs to be held 4 weeks after the general election. The lengthy 9-week runoffs in 2020 were exhausting for candidates, donors, and electors. By adding ranked choice voting for military and overseas voters, the runoff period can be shortened to a more manageable period for all involved, easing the burden on election officials and on electors. However, weekend voting for general elections has been expanded, with a mandatory 2 Saturdays of voting offered across the state. Counties are also able to decide whether to offer early voting on 2 optional Sundays. And the next thing, I'm going to probably the last thing I read right here, aims to address and update voter processes and disparities after COVID-19 alterations. The argument throughout the presidential election in favor of mass absentee voting was that it was necessary to change required to deal with the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. SB 202 makes the argument point that, SB 202 makes the inarguable point that The stress of the 2020 elections, with a dramatic increase in absentee by mail ballots and pandemic restrictions, demonstrated where there were opportunities to update existing processes to reduce the burden on election officials and boost voter confidence. In the same section, the bill also noted the broad discretion allowed to local officials when it came to altering voting days and hours, which led to significant variations across the state. In addition, the disparities regarding timing, the bill also notes the variation in funding. Some counties in 2020 received significant infusions of grant funding for election operations, while other counties received no such funds, promoting uniformity in the distribution of funds to election operations will boost voter confidence and ensure there is no political advantage conferred by preferring certain counties over others in the distribution of funds, the bill reads. Alrighty. So again, this bill is pretty good for the most part. But again, it's not perfect because, one of the things it does do is still allow things like early voting and all that, which again, early voting should not be allowed. I have participated in myself because of work reasons, simply because it was what's available. But again, it does, in my opinion, still need to be done. We have an election day for a reason, and that's the window you should be able to vote right there. And as far as absentee ballots, that should be again restricted to where you had to give a specific reason why you can't make it, and a legit reason, and provide ID and all that, which is what this bill does is require ID for absentee ballots and everything, which is really good. It needs to happen. So overall, this is a great starting point, and I do think states should eventually follow suit with this, and hopefully they do. I know Florida is probably already has their stuff together, but states like Texas, Michigan, places where there were issues need to probably pass this. So hopefully they do. So, one of the things, the left is now trying to push is that this was now a racist and just radical piece of legislation. Like Elizabeth Warren said that this is a product of Jim Crow and all that. President Biden said the exact same thing. So here's what he tweeted out about it. The Georgia voting law, like so many others being pursued by Republicans in state houses across the country, is a blatant attack on the right to vote, the Constitution, and good conscience. It's Jim Crow in the 21st century. It must end. No, it's not a product of 21st of Jim Crow. Because the whole idea that somehow it is horrifically racist and horrible to require ID to vote, I don't understand the logic. Is the logic from the left is that people of color are somehow too dumb to get IDs? Because if they believe that, they're the ones who are being racist right there. Because it is very simple to get an ID. It doesn't have to be like a driver's license. It could be like a simple state ID. And it's very, very simple to go get if you want to vote. And ID is used for many cases, for many, many, many other things. But somehow it's very bad to use it for voting. I just don't understand the logic. So the Washington Post will release an opinion piece. It's titled "A Scorching Reply to Georgia's Vile New Voting Law Unmasks a Big GOP Lie." So here's what the piece says. The 2020 elections in Georgia should have been a cause for celebration among everyone, not just Democrats who won the state's presidential and Senate races. Amid extremely challenging conditions, election officials took smart, public-spirited steps to ensure that as many voters as possible could participate. And it worked. Turnout was impressively high on election day and during the Senate runoffs, especially among African American voters. That should have been widely cheered, yet it's especially what the state's Republican officials apparently want to ensure never happens again. The Georgia Republicans just passed a far-reaching voter suppression law. I love that. The voter suppression law that is shockingly blatant in efforts to restrict voting. It was signed Thursday by Governor Brian Kemp as one Democratic lawmaker who sought to watch was arrested. Well, she wasn't just watching, she was actually banging on the door and trying to get in and everything, so that's why she was arrested. But she was released. In multiple ways, the measure appears designed to target African American voters, the very voters who drove the 2020 Democratic wins. The complaint is at the core of a new lawsuit filed on Thursday night against the law, but the lawsuit also exposes in a fresh way the appalling dishonesty of Republicans who continue using former President Donald Trump's lie about the election to justify voter suppression efforts everywhere. Again, you don't have to believe the lie President Trump was trying to push in order to believe that this law was needed. Again, election reform is needed all throughout the United States. And this is not voter suppression. Voter suppression on steroids. Most conspicuously, the new law bars third-party groups from sharing food and water with waiting at voting lines and imposes new ID requirements for a vote by mail, restricts drop boxes for mail ballots, and bans mobile voting places, among many other things. The lawsuit by several voter rights groups, represented by Democratic lawyer Mark Elias, argues that the package unduly burdens the voting rights of all Georgians, disproportionately African Americans, violating the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. No, it doesn't. The lawsuit cites the extremely high voter turnout in the general election and the runoff elections, facilitated amid a raging pandemic by vote by mail, which is used by African American voters at higher risk than white voters. The law is largely targeted toward the fact that the lawsuit argues restrictions on drop boxes and mobile voting units come after both were heavily utilized in Fulton County, a populous majority black area. African Americans are more likely to use drop boxes because they more often work multiple jobs, this argues. Meanwhile, bans on sharing food and water target the fact that voting lines and wait times tend to be longer in African American areas, and black voters are disproportionately less likely to have the right ID to qualify to vote by mail, the lawsuit argues. The critical point is that the past election worked, due to the very practices Republicans now want to curb. Organizers distributed food and water, enabling voters to brave lines. Election officials used expanded vote-by-mail and drop boxes and mobile units to facilitate pandemic voting. This successful mobilization is widely heralded as crucial facilitating black voter turnout, lawsuit notes, which is precisely the problem. The lawsuit argues what Republicans want to avert is another successful mobilization. Republicans give away the game. The justification that Republicans themselves offer for these measures gives away the real game. The real game here. Defendants say that they are needed to ensure the integrity of future elections and boost public confidence in them. But the elections in Georgia were conducted with absolute integrity, And the Republican Secretary of State himself attested to this. That official, Brad Raffensperger, declared elections were safe and secure. This caused Raffensperger to become a target of Trump's rage. But that doesn't mean that Raffensperger said wasn't true, because it is true. This was confirmed in a statewide audit. Indeed, Raffensperger attested to the integrity of Georgia elections more generally, declaring Georgia's voting system has never been more secure or trustworthy. Which raises questions: why are these measures needed? If Georgia elections were already secure and trustworthy, why to avert another successful mobilization? As the lawsuit argues, the very fact that GOP officials confirmed the integrity of elections shows the measures serve no legitimate purpose or compelling state interest other than to make absentee early election day voting more difficult, especially for minority voters. Yes, the law doesn't include some earlier onerous provisions, such as limits on Sunday voter drivers, but that doesn't change the fact that many measures that are restricted have no serious rationale. So yeah, this piece is just absolutely ridiculous. Again, the idea that somehow this was unnecessary and that this was just really the Republicans trying to go after African American voters, trying to stop them from voting or whatever nonsense. It's not true whatsoever. Again, yes, the election here was secure in the sense that there was not stolen. But there was some weird things that did happen. There was some weird things. And so the election here was not, all across the country, was not entirely clean. Even though there was no evidence that the election was stolen, it was not entirely clean. So again, this legislation is necessary. It is necessary to make the elections more secure and to boost voter confidence, which is very crucial. Very crucial. Alrighty, so now let's move on back to President Biden. So President Biden, after about 65 days or so, he finally held his first press conference. And as you would expect, it was not good. I can't joke about it because it is quite sad that this guy is not there. He is very clearly in mental decline. Very clearly. And the left and the media want to ignore it. They want to say, oh no, he's all with it. He is sharp. He is a man of integrity and transparency and everything. It's not true whatsoever. This guy is not there mentally anymore. So here's a little bit of a clip from his press conference.
So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh, Ms. Kim.
Thank you, Mr. President. To follow up on the filibuster.
Seriously, how can you watch this clip right here and say, no, he's all with it? The guy is clearly not with it. And really, it's abuse for him. That to go through this, that they're trying to use him as a shield to push these radical policies. And it's really sad. Seriously, it's really sad to see. But again, like I said, the media wants to ignore it and say, oh, he's all with it. He's all with it. So the Washington Post posted an article talking about President Biden's press conference, and here's the title of it. Excuse me. The Art of the Possible. Biden lays out pragmatic vision for his presidency. President Biden, answering the 29th question in his first presidential news conference on the 65th day in office, offered one of the clearest distillations of his theory of his presidency and how its success will be measured. It's a matter of timing, he said, in an answer in which he was referring to gun control measures but could have been referencing almost any other part of his agenda. As you've all observed, successful presidents better than me have been successful in large part because they know how to time what they're doing and order it, decide, and prioritize what needs to be done. The arc of history, in Biden's view, comes down to pragmatism. It explains how he has approached his opening months in office and how he is looking at the coming years. It illustrates how he can describe some Republican policies as sick and un-American while not doing everything in his power to merely stop them. He called the filibuster a racist relic of Jim Crow, while also insisting that he wasn't ready to remove it entirely in hopes that there would be some compromise. Successful electoral politics is the art of the possible, he said. Amid questions whether Biden will be transformation or transitional, whether his strong-armed deal-making man up the Senate like Lyndon B. Johnson or a New Deal government spending president like Franklin D. Roosevelt, the hour-long session with reporters revealed how Biden is attempting to be a combination with his own twists. Biden is a politician who craves simple language over soaring rhetoric. He often asks his aides to explain things to him and the public the same way they would talk to their mothers, as he stood in the ornate East Room of the White House on Thursday. The distillation of the Biden governing doctrine is one that relies on basic nuts and bolts. When I took office, I decided that it was fairly basic, simple proposition, and that I got elected to solve problems, Biden said. He sought to speak to the frustrations around inaction on gun control or the multi-pronged crisis around immigration or the threats to voting rights. But on many of those issues, he urged a bit of patience, saying the coronavirus and economic devastation were more urgent priorities, and that the country political system can handle so much at once. We're going to move on these one at a time. Try to do as many simultaneous as we can, he said. But that is the reason why I focus as I have. I mean, seriously, this piece is pretty much like a dressage session for Biden right here. It's ridiculous. Saying like pretty much like, oh, he's all with it. He is sharp. He knows exactly what he's doing. I'm sorry, he does not. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's gone mentally. And really, the person who's in charge probably is Kamala Harris. She's probably the one in charge trying to push all this. But the left wants to use Biden as a shield to say, we're not radical. These policies are not radical. See, we have a moderate Joe Biden here. It's not going to work. It's not going to work anymore because people are going to be fed up with it. Alrighty, so now we got all that away. So now let's move on to the final topic of the day. So the final topic of the day is basically I'm talking about what the gospel really has to say about racial issues, about racism and all that. So where I want to start is basically kind of ask the question, what is racism? What is the actual definition of racism? And basically what racism is, or a more proper term for this, because race is not an actual legit term. The proper term for this is ethnicity. And as far as what ethnic hatred, that's pretty much what it is. And ethnic hatred is basically you hate someone because you hold prejudice, you hate someone, and you see yourself as superior to them because of their ethnicity, because of their color of the skin and all that. That is what ethnic hatred is. That's what racism is, and all that. I mean, as simply what it is. Even though the left today would like to say no is unlike race plus prejudice plus power or whatever, which I'll get to that a little later. But the Bible does have something to say about ethnicity and all that, and how to approach all that. So first, let's jump to Galatians chapter 3. So Galatians chapter 3, starting from verse 28, it says this: "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to promise." So again, according to Paul right here in Galatians, that there's no Jew or Greek, no slave nor free, no male or female. Basically, what he's saying, especially for the church, it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. It doesn't matter if you're a male or female or whatever. If you're a follower of Christ, we are all one. We are all part of the body of Christ. So now let's jump to Ephesians chapter 2. Oh, there we go. So Ephesians chapter 2, starting from verse 11. And here's what that says. Okay. "Therefore, remember that formerly the Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, which is performed in the flesh by human hands, remembering that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who formerly were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself in our peace, who made both groups into one, broke down the barrier of the dividing wall." So again, Paul is kind of repeating what he said in Galatians. Basically, it is no longer dividing between ethnicities in the church. We are all one. And so one other place I want to go to is Revelation chapter 7. So in Revelation chapter 7, this is starting from verse 9. It's called, multitude from the tribulation. "After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude from which no one could count, from every nation and all tribes and people and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, and palm branches were in their hands. And they cry out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." So basically, that's talking about, heaven, right there towards the end times, where essentially the rapture, if you will, where all Christians are being taken up. And basically what the point is that when John saw that, he's saying he saw people from all different regions of the earth all different skin colors, all different tongues or languages, if you will. So again, the Bible is very clear about ethnicity and how, in Christ, it doesn't matter. Your skin color does not matter. It is, it's nothing. It's basically, what you look like, and that's pretty much it. It does not define your identity. It does not define your character or your heart. So, putting all your identity on your skin color, it makes no sense. But, of course, this is where CRT comes in, or critical race theory, where, they say, no, race is a very important part of your identity, and it's probably the most important part of your identity. So, first off, what is CRT? What is critical race theory? So, to a simple kind of definition of it, kind of background of it, Britannica, basically kind of laid out, what it is. So here's what it says. Critical race theory, or CRT for short, the view that the law and legal institutions are inherently racist, and that race itself, instead of being biologically grounded and natural, is socially constructed concept that is used by white people to further their economic and political interests at the expense of people of color. According to critical race theory, racial inequality emerges from social, economic, and legal differences that white people create between races to maintain elite white interests in labor markets and politics, giving rise to poverty and criminality in many minority communities. The CRT movement officially organized itself in 1989 at the first annual workshop on critical race theory. Through its intellectual origins go back further to the 1960s and 1970s. The launch of the CRT movement marked the separation of critical legal studies, an offshoot of critical theory, that examined how the law and legal institutions function to perpetuate oppression and exploitation. However, instead of drawing theories on social organization, individual behavior, on continental European thinkers such as G.W.F. Hegel, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud, as CLS and feminist jurisprudence had done. CRT was designed by was inspired by figures such as Martin Luther King Jr., W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, and Frantz Fanon. Critical race theory advanced on theoretical understandings of the law, politics, and American sociology that focused on the efforts of white people, Euro-Americans, to maintain their historical advantages over people of color. CRT spread beyond the confines to legal studies to many other fields, notably women's and gender studies, education, American studies, sociology. CRT spin-offs formed by Asian American, Latinx, or Latino, and LGBTQ scholars have also taken hold. So basically, again, what CRT is basically another way to look at the world through the lens of race. Basically, all problems have to do with race. There's no personal responsibility. Especially if you're a person of color, if you're a black person, if you have a problem with your life, let's do the white supremacy. Basically, anything that's purported is that's considered white culture is very bad and needs to be taken out completely. So basically, the CRT version of racism is prejudice plus power. And basically what that means is that it is completely justified if a black person hates a white person based on the color of their skin. That's completely justified, and that's not racism according to CRT. So it is pretty ridiculous. And what's pretty sad is that, hold on, 1 second. All right, sorry about that. I took on my throat, so I didn't want to cough into the mic. So again, like I was saying, kind of the sad part is that some people in the church are starting to buy into this. So I'll get to that in just a little bit, but really, there is only one reason why for racism. There's only one reason for ethnic hatred, and it all comes down to one issue, and that's the issue of sin, the sinful nature of man. So let's quickly jump to Romans 3:23. So Romans 3:23 says this: "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." All have sinned. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Basically, there's no one who is righteous. Actually, let's go back a little bit to Romans 3:10. So Romans 3, starting from verse 10, says this: "As it is written, there is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There is none who does good. There is not even one. Their throat is an open grave. With their tongues they keep deceiving. The poison of asps is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their paths. In the path of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes." So again, that is another basic way of saying that we as humans are not, as nature, we're not good according to God's definition of good. We're not righteous according to God, apart from Christ. So it is our nature to not seek God unless He draws us to Him. And it's all this is, of course, origin, like I kind of mentioned last week when I talked about, what is the gospel? It all origins goes back to Genesis 3. About, in the Garden of Eden. So I'm going to go through part of that. So again, the fall of man. Now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "From the fruit of the trees of the garden and we may eat. But from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die." Then the serpent said to the woman, "You surely will not die, for God knows that in the day you will eat from it, and your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So again, it all stems back from that. Basically, from that question when the first serpent said, "Has God really said? Has God really said?" And all this. And basically, what kind of pointing to is that the gospel, the Bible, scripture does have something to say about racism. Any problem that's, socially, economic, political problem, the gospel, the Bible has something to say about it. But the idea from CRTers is that, has God really said something about that? And what's sad, again, like I said, is that the church has started to buy into this. Has started to say, let's have the gospel. We have the gospel, but let's add this in order to kind of fix these racial issues. So basically, the idea from the church nowadays is that the gospel is not enough anymore. It's simply not enough. That we need the gospel plus something else. Basically, it's going back to the Garden of Eden, where it's said, has God really said something about race? And so that's why we should have this in order to really tackle the issue. But the thing is, the gospel, scripture is enough. It is enough because God is enough. So, 2 Timothy 3:16-17, it says this. Let me flip to it. So 2 Timothy 3:16-17 says this: all scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. So, scripture is sufficient. It is enough. But the idea that somehow it is not enough regarding race, as somehow race is somehow a whole different category of sin that the gospel doesn't cover, is complete BS. It's complete and utter BS. When we start adding stuff to the gospel and everything, we're going down a very, very wrong path. Again, the gospel is enough. We need to stop adding to it. We need to stop. Let's real quick jump to Galatians chapter 1 real quick. So Galatians chapter 1, started from verse 8, says this: but even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to what we have preached to you, he is to be accursed, as we have said before. So I say again, now, if any man is preaching to you a gospel contrary to what you have received, he is to be accursed. For am I now seeking the favor of men or of God? Or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. So again, it says very clearly, anybody who tries to add the gospel, anybody who tries to preach a gospel that's contrary to the actual gospel, they are to be accursed. Because, really what the CRT plus the gospel is another form of the social gospel, which is a false gospel. The social gospel, prosperity gospel, are all false gospels. Like I tackled last week. And like I said before, we need to practice discernment regarding this. We need to be careful and diligent and know the actual gospel in order to spot things like this before it really comes into the church. Alrighty, so now let's go to Acts chapter 7. So last week we finished chapter 6, so we're going to be going through part of the chapter 7 today. Start probably going through at verse 12. So here's what it says. Stephen's defense. The high priest said, are these things so? And he said, hear me, brethren and fathers. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. How do we say that? Before he lived in Haran. And he said to him, leave your country and your relatives and come to the land that I will show you. Then he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. From there, after his father died, God had him move to this country in which you are now living. But he gave him no inheritance to it, not even a foot of ground. And yet, when he had no child, he promised that he would give to him as a possession and to his descendants after him. But God spoke to this effect, that his descendants will be aliens in a foreign land, in that they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. And whatever nation to which they will be in bondage, I myself will judge, God said, and after that they will come out and serve me in this place. and he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham became the father of Isaac and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. The patriarchs became jealous of Joseph and sold him into Egypt. Yet God was with him and rescued him from all this from all of his afflictions, and granted him favor and wisdom in the sight of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he made him governor over Egypt and all his household. Now a famine came over all Egypt and Canaan, and great affliction with it, and our fathers could find no food. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our brothers there the first time. Alrighty. So I'm going to stop there for right now because chapter 7 is pretty long, so I kind of want to break it down a little bit. Alrighty, so now let's move on to the good stuff and bad stuff of the week. Really just the good stuff. So the good stuff of the week, so over the past couple of weeks actually, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier have finally been released on Disney Plus, at least the first 2 episodes, and it's pretty good so far. It is pretty good. It hasn't really hooked me in like what WandaVision did. Like WandaVision kind of really hooked me and really piqued my interest from episode 1 because it was this mystery that like, what is going on here? What is going on with Wanda? What is she up to? Is she doing this? Is she not? It was a very intriguing show. But even then, this show, without the Falcon and Winter Soldier, it's still pretty good. It's still pretty good in my opinion. And here's a little bit of the trailer for it.
So, who would like to start? Mr. Barnes, why does Sam aggravate you?
15 seconds to drop. So what's our plan?
Great. Superheroes cannot be allowed to exist. I have no intention to leave my work unfinished. The world's upside down right now. Where do we start?
We came here to see Jet. What you got? No, not on my.
Buck, I have a plan. Oh yeah? What is it?
Is you ready?
Here we go again, huh?
We've been grinding hard on the job. Can't take that from us. Are you ready? Is you ready? You said you ready. Ready? Is you ready? Are you ready? Is you ready?
That little girl kick your ass. Gotta get that first shot off before that bullet hit me.
See? That wasn't so hard.
Are you ready? Is you ready?
Okay.
You say you ready.
What are you doing?
Whole squad ready.
Are you having a staring contest?
Are you ready? Is you ready?
Just blink. Sweet Jesus. I mean, how old are you?
Again, it is really good. And the relationship between kind of Bucky and Sam right here is kind of like, we kind of saw it in Civil War, kind of their bickering back and forth. It's kind of like, if you've seen it, Hobbs and Shaw, kind of the spin-off from Fast and Furious, kind of like their relationship where they just, but it's less vulgar in this one, is pretty hilarious. But definitely check it out. If you haven't. So I'm really kind of excited to see, where these Marvel shows, because they done a really good job with these shows so far. Like WandaVision was excellent. This show seems excellent so far. So I'm really excited to see where this goes. I mean, it's a for superhero fans right now. It's a really good time because we got this, we got the Snyder cut of Justice League, which was awesome, and I got there's a new online campaign to restore the Snyderverse. Basically, all Zack Snyder's kind of different his ideas for Justice League 2, the third Justice League, the Batman movie, Cyborg, the Flash, and all that. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of that. Alright, so I think that's all I have for this episode. So I'll be back here next week with all the latest. My name is Sean Clinton, and this is the Guide to Freedom Show. If you enjoyed this episode of the Guide to Freedom Show, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Remember, you can find this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This episode is brought to you by Anchor. Thank you for listening or watching. Hey guys, so I want to kind of give a quick heads up about something that's coming up here in the fall. So that is the G3 conference. It's happening here in Atlanta, Georgia. It will take place in the World Congress Center, just right near the CNN Center and like Olympic Park right there. Definitely, this might be my first time going here, and we have main speakers there, such as Vodi Bankam, Paul Washer, John MacArthur, John Bruce, Phil Johnson, James White, Daryl Harrison, Virgil Walker, and a lot of others. So if you haven't registered yet, just go and register. You can simply type into Google G3 Conference 2021. Click on go to website, click on events, and the event is called for G3 2021 Christ. Go there, click on register now, and then you can fill out your details are right there. Again, and I'll be there, and this will be my first time going there, so I definitely, if you have the chance, recommend trying to go in there. So it seems like it'll be a lot of fun. So definitely go check it out.